Hi everyone, meteorologist Steve Caparata here with another episode of Coast and Climate. And today's guest has really become the envy of many meteorologists, at least this guy you're looking at right here. When I saw some of the work and some of the video that he posted to Twitter recently, he got involved with a Disney Plus project, a new series on Disney Plus called America the Beautiful. And this series kind of dives into the beautiful natural landscapes that we have all across North America, nature, and also takes a look at some of the crazy weather that we see across the United States and this continent, and that's how he got involved. So happy to have Joey Picca with me today. And before I bring him on, let me tell you a little bit about Joey. He's a meteorologist with the Cooperative Institute for Severe and High Impact Weather Research and Operations. I'm going to have him explain all that in just a moment. But he also got involved with this project with Disney. He was the decision support meteorologist for a company called V-Speed, who did a lot of this amazing cinematography that you'll see if you check out the series. So with that, let me bring in Joey. Joey, thank you so much for being here this morning.
Thank you for having me, Steve.
All right, so tell us a little bit about this project that you got involved with, America the Beautiful, how you got involved, and really what it is.
Sure. So, yeah, that's usually the first question I get. And, you know, I wish I could say I was really pounding the pavement or something and going out and finding these folks and saying, oh, you need me. This is what I need to do. But it was as simple as a former supervisor of mine was contacted by the folks at V-Speed, who you had mentioned, who had just been signed on by a company, WildStar, that was producing the series for Disney Plus and Nat Geo. And they were looking for somebody to do aerial cinematography or to specialize in that. So that became them this would be early summer 2020, spring 2020, where they wanted to get footage of storms. They wanted to fly. At the time, they were using one of the two planes, an L-39 Albatross, which is a light trainer jet, and small, at the time built in Czechoslovakia, fighter jet that is quite good for maneuverability and getting around dynamic features such as thunderstorms. And they had put this incredible gimbal and camera system underneath the nose. And so they were looking for a meteorologist then to help them send that plane around storms, and also just to help with general forecasting for light conditions, things like that. They had reached out to several folks. They then spoke with a former supervisor of mine. This would have been May 2020. That supervisor then reached out to me and said, these guys they're looking for somebody to help them send a plane to film thunderstorms. Does that sound like something that interests you? And I was like, of course, yeah. I'm also an aviation geek. And so that and weather, I wanted to do that immediately. So I was put in touch with them. And maybe 10 days later, I was on a flight to Rapid City, South Dakota to help them forecast and be the meteorologist for the aerial cinematography, much of which that occurs in this series.
Yeah, and as I say, the envy of so many like me. So before I start asking you some more questions about this project, what I'd like to do is kind of roll the trailer for the series, give people an idea of what it's all about, and then we'll get a little more into some of the storms that you guys filmed. So let's go ahead and roll this video and let people see a little bit of what America the Beautiful is all about.
Spacious skies, amber waves, purple mountains, the most diverse continent on Earth. This is America. America. Sea to shining sea.
So hopefully that caught people's attention. So full disclosure here, I just got around Joey to watching episode 1 yesterday. And what might be of interest to people here in Louisiana too is a few minutes into episode number 1, there are some scenes shot right in our backyard in the Atchafalaya Swamp here just west of Baton Rouge. So pretty interesting. But so people get to see this isn't just about weather. This covers a broad range of topics as it relates to the natural landscapes here in North America, right? This is about much more than just weather.
Correct. Really, the thrust, the main story of the series is about the wildlife and the ecosystems they live in and how they all interplay. Obviously, a sizable impact on that is the weather, the extreme weather that they have to face from the deep south, from Louisiana, for instance, all the way up to Alaska, where you have endless night at points in the winter. And so it's really how the wildlife have learned to, a big theme of the series is that they're heroes. They find a way to be heroes in these different settings and these different ecosystems. And so it's how the wildlife learn to thrive and exist and continue in these different ecosystems and how the weather in turn plays into that.
Yeah, you mentioned some of those heroes. I thought it was really interesting. Right at the beginning of episode 1, it starts out kind of featured in on a squirrel. And people might think, okay, how interesting is a squirrel? But it's really so well done. It really draws you in right off the bat. All right, so you talked about all the different elements involved, but obviously I brought you in to talk specifically about the weather. The company you worked with, V-Speed, also produced a behind-the-scenes video. I want to give people a look at that because it gives you a look at some of the really cool stuff that you guys did, and then I'm going to ask you some questions about that. So let's roll this video.
There's a lot of people who fought and lost their lives trying to show people how these forces come together.
I was that kid, 5, 6 years old, when the Weather Channel was born. And now it's just a sheer fascination.
He kind of went a little bit more into the meteorological side of why is this stuff happening, and I was trying to figure out how do we capture it.
Everything starts and stops with the weather. What goes into setting up the perfect shot? Okay, that's great. You just gave me a probability of damaging winds. But how's it gonna look?
Some of the most groundbreaking forecasting for film that's ever been attempted.
The level and detail of the questions just ramps up exponentially.
We're able to target storms that are way below the threshold for public forecasts. You feel like you got let inside of some kind of secret, and I feel really, really lucky.
This is stuff that every pilot is trained specifically to avoid.
We take it up to the edge of where the safety ends so we can come in and get the best shots.
To have an expert giving you instant feedback. You can fly safely in that area, don't go into that area. And it could be 2 to 3 degrees.
John, what's your heading? Are you going straight towards this?
I come from a background as an F-14 pilot. Really the payload we're carrying is a camera. It's the most technical flying I've done.
Keep an eye on that thing, because if that makes a tornado, run straight at it.
Low-level instability swirling right up into it.
What if we wanted to move a camera really fast? What types of things would we do with that to apply to storytelling?
What are people going to be able to see that they wouldn't have seen if we just didn't do that flight?
And that's the product.
Not very many people have ever seen that. In fact, I'm not sure anyone's ever seen that. And now everybody gets to.
So, Joey, hats off to you guys. It's some of the most remarkable weather video I think I've ever seen. And when you hear the pilot say this is probably the most technical flying he's ever done, there had to be some pressure there, right? Especially on you as somebody they were relying on to A, get them to what they want to see, and B, keep them safe along the way.
Sure. Oh, pressure. No, anybody that talked to me in the 2 weeks prior would tell you I was totally cool as a cucumber. No, what pressure? No, it was, yeah, there was a feeling of tension inside my body for sure for the weeks leading up to that, because we knew we were getting into storm season, and the time we were looking to go capture this film of these storms and hopefully a tornado, if not multiple tornadoes. So there were different levels of pressure and tension, and honestly, once we got into the flying itself and the storm was there and it produced the tornado, we had seen tornado genesis, so on and so forth. There wasn't, I would say, a feeling of concern for safety of those on board, myself. Really, that wasn't there too much. We had put in the work. We had put in the training. I think in the behind the scenes, there was a clip of us going through a PowerPoint on the various inner workings of storms and where the best place would be to fly. And we found, believe it or not, if for those viewers that aren't meteorologists or trained in meteorology, that was actually a gentler supercell thunderstorm, if you could believe it, with a lot of clear air around it, which is what we were trying to target because we wanted good light on the storm and potentially a tornado if we could get one. So that aspect and the flying was really, I was just so overwhelmed that we had achieved the goal we set out to do. I think the biggest pressure for me was, you can't just say, well, tomorrow we're going to have tornadoes, so let's get everybody out there. It requires much more planning. You're moving a private jet. Phenom 300 was that jet where we could put everybody in there, not just the pilot, John Flanagan, who spoke, the F-14 pilot, who, by the way, is a former Top Gun adversarial pilot, a real life Top Gun. So having him up front really made me feel just fine in terms of who was flying it. But it was the pressure of the forecasting weeks out for a pattern that would be favorable for this, and thinking to myself, if I don't get this right, I feel like so many people are depending on it. But having the faith in myself, and also knowing that this team that I'd known for over a year now would give me that leeway to make those calls to deploy.
So I've got a two-part kind of follow-up question to that. Number one, part A, were tornadoes the main thing you guys wanted to get? And then B, how long did it take you guys to capture everything that you wanted for this series?
Sure, those are good questions. I wouldn't say tornadoes were the main target for us, but they were certainly a sizable component of what we wanted to capture. First off, we had a series of shots involving storms, squall lines, a developing line of storms. There's a shot in that behind the scenes of just updrafts going up one after another that we raced down the side of that were along a dry line. So we had a whole series of shots and we were knocking them off one by one. But sort of the final nugget was a tornado, because they wanted to include a tornado, again, if not multiple tornadoes, in the series, especially to play a role in the story of the heartland and the burrowing owls and the prairie dogs that were out there, and how they have to deal with these extreme weather events such as tornadoes. So while it wasn't the primary target, it was one of the main targets. And then on the second question, how long it took to do it, just for the supercells and tornadoes and storms, that was mainly 2 deployments of spring 2021, one in May, one in June, where we were out for about 3 to 4 days each. So there was a lot of forecasting going into it. One thing I would love for folks to know is it wasn't like we were sitting out there for 2 months just twiddling our thumbs saying, okay, today looks like a good day for storms. These are all people who are doing other things in their lives or helping to build up V-speed or what have you. And so we really needed to be targeted in the dates that we identified for our storm footage. Of course, there was lots of other aerial cinematography that you see. All the sweeping shots in the series are pretty much all V-speed shots, but that was a different planning process. The storms themselves was really two primary deployments that we had.
All right, speaking of those storms, I got to share the video, one more video here before I ask you a couple more questions to wrap up. This is the one you shared on Twitter that I was just like, wow, when I saw it. And let me show you the video. Let's show our viewers the video, and then we'll come out and talk about this incredible storm you guys captured. I mean, just jaw-dropping footage. So tell us the story on where that storm was and how you guys got to it. And let me ask you this too, because when you tweeted that out, I don't know, I think it was a week or so ago, you wrote in your tweet that words failed to describe how it felt from the air. So I want you today to try and describe how that felt from the air, seeing that and seeing it up close.
This is a challenge for me, but I'll do my best because, so this storm in particular is the same storm that produced that, because there were two different tornadoes that we showed. And this was the first one, that thinner funnel off of the entire supercell. And this was in West Texas, just northwest of Lubbock. The storm initially developed right near the Texas-New Mexico border and then slowly tracked east-southeast. At this point, it was no longer producing a tornado, but it was transitioning into what we call a low precipitation supercell, which is something, again, we were somewhat looking for in the planning process because we wanted something isolated, not too dark, very picturesque. And as we were to put those words to what I was seeing, as we were flying in and doing these circuits in the inflow region of the supercell and then doing that long run in and the climb and just scraping past the mid-level mesocyclone and then coming around to the rear flank. And Greg Wilson, the DOP who was operating one of the cameras, tilts up, who just does a magnificent job with his creativity and what he can pull off. Honestly, in the moment, and it's probably a good thing there isn't a picture from me from, I don't know, the wing, some of the cameras we had, because my face was just on the window, just with my mouth wide open. Just, you can ask the guys with V-Speed. I was truly speechless in the moment because, as you understand, I'm sure that we train and learn about the science and the theory, and then we put it into practice and we warn people on it. We track storms on radar. We see the pretty pictures and connect the two and help to deliver information better that way. But to be there with that unique of a perspective, incredible. When we say unique, sometimes the word is overused, but in this true instance, it was unique, where we are at 10,000, 15,000 feet on the backside of the storm, and you're watching the updraft just roll over as these incredible upward velocities are fueling the storm, the engine of the storm. And I think in my head, I was telling myself, you're probably almost certainly never going to see something like this again from this perspective. So just absorb it and take it in, because this is what we study and learn, and I was just so incredibly grateful to be put in that position.
It really does, even as an outsider looking in, that feels like a once in a lifetime type of moment and type of view. And you mentioned those roaring updrafts that you see there, and that was a question I had for you. What was kind of the technique? It almost looks like there's this time lapse, but as you're slowly panning around the storm, I mean, it's just unlike anything I've ever seen. How was that accomplished?
Sure. Well, we had a lot of training that went in beforehand. This was our first set of days out that we were all storm chasing in this small jet aircraft, or I say small business jet aircraft, the Phenom 300, where we had two pilots, the aerial coordinator, which was Mike Knockenhauer, myself, a tech, two folks on the cameras, and actually the individual who was doing behind the scenes work, who was fortunately able to document a lot of our work as we were flying around the storm. So the first or second day out, we sat down. Mike and I had produced a presentation to go over general thunderstorm, supercell morphology, squall line morphology, safe areas to fly, not so safe areas that could be a little deceiving on radar. And we had a presentation that we gave to the pilots, and we just discussed also with the folks on camera, just how we would go about working with a supercell thunderstorm, where the best shots might be, where the light might be best. And so we put in initial work to go over, just how the process would be, and then hashed it out with Greg and Mike, which routes we would like to take, how we'd like to do run-ins on the storm. We also had guidance from WildStar in terms of what shots they wanted for the series to tell stories, if they wanted certain reveals. So we're all meshing this together, and I'm there giving the meteorological input. And then really to get that supercell that we saw, that was just on its own, isolated from a lot of other storms that day. And then it became such this sculpted, again, low precipitation supercell that gave us the clear air and the distance to work with to do these run-ins and orbits of the storm. It did make it quite favorable having such a nice subject, if you will. I know saying nice subject about an angry thunderstorm doesn't sound exactly, doesn't maybe necessarily make sense off the top, but we were able to go through what we had trained on in the days prior pretty well. We were able to execute on that pretty well with this particular thunderstorm because it was so isolated, because we had the light coming in from the west. And so once it was clear that it probably wasn't going to be producing tornadoes anymore, and we didn't really need to worry about staying low to capture new tornadoes developing, we started to do these types of run-ins where we'd come in from many miles out, 10, 15, 20 miles out, run in towards the low part of the storm, and then slowly climb up around the mesocyclone to the backside of the storm, where we knew the light was going to be illuminating this massive updraft, and really tell this whole story. You get to see the whole engine of the thunderstorm working in that process. So there was a lot of work to go in. It wasn't just sort of like, well, this seems cool, let's try this. There was a lot that went in behind that beforehand.
I'm not a cinematographer, I'm a meteorologist, but I absolutely appreciate all the work, the thought, the planning that went into it. All right, before we wrap up, I've got to ask you one or two more questions. So this, in essence, as cool as it was, this is kind of a side gig for you, right? So what do you do full time? Explain to people, because what I love to do, what the podcast, this gives me the opportunity for especially younger people is hear about other career paths in meteorology. They often see those of us on TV. They don't get to see the other career paths nearly as much. So talk about a little bit about what you do now.
Sure. So as you mentioned off the top, and I'm glad you went with the acronym and explained the acronym, because I struggle to remember the acronym half the time with CIRO. We just changed names, actually used to be known as SIMS through the University of Oklahoma. It's a cooperative institute in meteorological and atmospheric research that I work for remotely. I work out of Dallas, Irving specifically, but from my time in Norman as a student, and then both working there, which I'll talk about in a second, at the Storm Prediction Center years later, I know many of the scientists and forecasters and researchers up there in Norman, Oklahoma. And so a couple of years ago, it was happening around the same time as the V-Speed sign-on, I was making a little bit of a pivot in what I was working on. And so I took a job as a research associate with CIRO, where this institute is a cooperative institute between NOAA, which is the parent agency of the National Weather Service, and the University of Oklahoma. And it employs a wealth of researchers and knowledge that work through either the National Severe Storms Lab or the Storm Prediction Center, or work with these agencies or the National Weather Service Forecast Office or other groups to help develop research that will help the forecasters really deliver information, and not just National Weather Service forecaster broadcast, for instance, broadcast meteorologists and others in the field provide better guidance to the public. So myself specifically, something that I work on is a lot of web visualization of meteorological impact data. So we'll take the outlook from the Storm Prediction Center, where they issue the severe weather outlooks across the United States, and we will turn that into simulations of perhaps how many tornadoes might impact a certain area on a particular day. And then we'll look at the societal exposure of those simulated tornadoes, not real tornadoes, to get some idea of how many people might be impacted on a certain day, and then building a dashboard to present that information to folks that might find that useful, such as FEMA. So things like that, and also just doing lots of journal article reading and reviews of journal articles, and more of the research type aspect there. And I'm just one of many folks who do so many amazing things with Zero.
Yes, sir, the Renaissance man of meteorology here, doing a little bit of everything. All right, so I'd be remiss before, we're running out of time, but I got to ask you. So I know you went to the University of Oklahoma, overlapped with a couple of our friends here, Jeff Morrow, who's still here at WAFB, and then Lauren Westbrook, our good friend, who's moved to Waco, Texas. So I got to ask you got any great stories about Lauren or Jeff from back in the day in college?
Oh goodness, I should have prepared. I would have come up with something off the top of my head. I don't think I have any amazing stories. I'm sure I'll think about them right after I get off of this. But what I do remember about both of them is just how outgoing and kind and friendly and warm they were. And they made, for somebody like me, I would get so nervous before an OU nightly broadcast. It was just my junior year and my senior year. It was the same for them. And you could tell they were destined for broadcast because they were cool and presented the information like it was no problem. Jeff and I remember going on a storm chase or two with Jeff. Now that I think I worked my brain a little bit there about it. And we struck out pretty hard, I think, on the storm chase in Kansas. We saw some cool storms, but I don't think we did that well. So I guess there's my story about Jeff, as maybe we weren't very good storm chasers our one time out. And Lauren, I do remember one day bumping into her, and she told me she thought I should go into broadcast. I think we were getting in towards the end of our senior year. And I was just like, nah, people like you are so much better at this than I am. And sure enough, she seems to be doing quite well. So I think, they seem like they found exactly where they need to be. But I remember them just being great folks to work with.
Well, it sounds like you're exactly where you need to be too. So Joey, I can't thank you enough. And by the way, if you ever need a wingman, if you need an Iceman to your Maverick, this guy right here in Baton Rouge is ready to hop aboard and help out.
I will remember that. You're coming next time out.
All right. Look, I've got it on tape now, so I'm going to hold on to that. But Joey Picca, thank you so much. Really appreciate your time.
Thank you so much for having me this morning.
All right, folks, hope you enjoyed that as much as I did. Really cool to hear that backstory. So check out the show on Disney Plus, the America the Beautiful. Really is amazing. Cinematography, not only when it comes to weather, but just beautiful overall, and the storytelling that goes along with it. I'm not getting anything from Disney Plus, I promise, but a really neat show if you want to check it out. All right, so maybe back with a new episode next week, but I do have another lined up for 2 weeks from now. I'm going to be joined by Jeremy DeHart, with the hurricane hunters based at Keesler Air Force Base in Biloxi, Mississippi. So we're in the hurricane season now. He's going to tell us a bit about his job, so be sure to check that one out in 2 weeks. So we'll see you then. And as always, you can catch all these episodes on WAFB Plus and on our website.